present. We'll call to order the Public Safety Committee meeting. And I'm going to ask Councilmember Robert Mitchell if he would lead us in either invocation or a moment of silence.
Present. Yeah, let's go of silence and pray for all the young people, the people that's have gotten being killed in violence. And I remember the young man that who lost his life on Calhoun Street the other morning anyway. So let's pray for his family and pray for the young man who did it. There's going to be a lot of people that's going to be hurted because of that on both sides. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Councilmember Mitchell. Before we go to item 2, which is the minutes, I want to entertain a motion to amend the agenda to include adding to our agenda a proposed amendment to section 21-1, our hate intimidation ordinance, to seek an amendment of that. I believe that we would need to have a 2/3 majority of committee members to amend that and to also show the exigent circumstances. This hate crime proposed amendment is to include language dealing with anti-Semitism, and based on the rise of anti-Semitism violence that is occurring throughout the country, I think that would qualify us to take this up as a matter that requires council's immediate review and proposal. So I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion about amending the agenda to include this proposed amendment? Hearing none, I'll call the roll. All those in favor of adding this to the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I think that was unanimous. Thank you. So let the record reflect that we are adding to our agenda this proposed ordinance. It's listed under council communications as J2 on our current council agenda. And you should have a copy of this ordinance. It was under council communications, and I discussed this with Councilmember Appel and thought it more appropriate that we take it up as far as Public Safety Committee this afternoon. Then we can report this out to full council at our council meeting. So Councilmember Appel, I'm going to call on you to explain a little bit about this ordinance and what we're seeking to accomplish by making this amendment to add this act of anti-Semitism into the proposed ordinance.
Councilmember Shade, first, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be at the committee today, and I appreciate you taking this matter up before public safety. A little bit of background of how this ordinance came together. The FBI Director, Christopher Wray, gave some comments to Congress last week because the 2022 national hate crime statistics were published and were making the rounds. And he was quoted as saying that the threat of anti-Semitism is reaching, quote, historic levels, end quote. And he said that the Jewish community is targeted by terrorists across the political spectrum, including homegrown violent extremists, foreign terrorist organization, and domestic violent extremists. And while Jews make up only 2.4% of the public in the United States, if you can believe it, 60% of all religious-based hate crimes in 2022 were committed against Jews. And that was in 2022, before October 7th happened of this year, when the terrorists with Hamas invaded and brutally killed civilians, men, women, child, killed and kidnapped babies, and everybody has seen the horrific images and footage that have been inescapable over the last month or so. And stemming from that incident and Israel's response, there's been a rise in anti-Semitism across Europe and across the United States. And so here in Charleston, as we all remember, we had a rally in support of Israel at City Hall. This followed a unanimous emergency resolution that this council passed, condemning Hamas, supporting Israel. which was wonderful. And in fact, was used as a template by cities around the country. They modeled their resolutions after what we did in the city of Charleston. It's really incredible. We had Senator Graham come to Charleston to meet with us. We had the Israeli Consul General and her staff come to Charleston to meet with the mayor and myself. And one of the things that we discussed in our meeting was looking at adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism into our body of laws. And we thought, I thought that the hate crimes ordinance was a natural fit, since this is sort of already a strong position that the city has taken against hate and prejudice against anybody, any ethnicity, religion, race, creed, what have you. So a little bit about this definition, IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. It's not very long. I'll read it to you. Quote, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. End quote. This definition was adopted by the federal government through executive order a few years ago. 38 states in the United States have adopted this definition. In fact, South Carolina is in the process of doing so at the state level. Hundreds of cities around the country have already done this. Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Dallas, north, south, east, west, red states, blue states, all the above have adopted this definition. And then many countries around the world have as well. So this is something that has a lot of support behind it. It's well within the mainstream. It doesn't prohibit free speech. The IHRA website explicitly recognizes that criticism of Israel policy is not anti-Semitism. This is not designed to shut people down. It's a very measured, balanced approach. And I think it would be a significant step for the city of Charleston, following on the heels of the resolution we adopted to amend our hate crimes ordinance with just a single sentence. And all we're adding to the hate crimes ordinance is just saying, for the purposes of this ordinance, anti-Semitism means the definition set forth by the IHRA. So that's the gist of it. That's kind of how it all came together. I know this means a lot to the Jewish community. Right now, Jews around the world are facing a lot of, threats from all sides, unfortunately. And I think this would just be a very strong signal that the city of Charleston takes anti-Semitism seriously and won't tolerate it, just like we won't tolerate any other forms of bigotry, prejudice, and injustice. So that about does it. I appreciate everybody's consideration. And I hope we can move this to full council this evening for a vote. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval that we add this definition to our hate crime ordinance.
So for the record, to be clear, that we're adding this phrase, including any act of anti-Semitism, and then adding a sentence that says, for purposes of this section, anti-Semitism refers to the definition set forth by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA. So is there a second to the mayor's motion?
Second.
There's a second. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of amending section 21-1, hate intimidation, to include that included language, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Councilmember Appel, thank you for doing that. And I would like to work with you on putting together another resolution to send to our Charleston delegation to ask them to expedite consideration of a hate crime bill to include this language in it as well.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda is approval of the October 9, 2023 minutes.
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. I will call on Steve Runland to address item number 3, Police Department approval of ISO Claims Search Access Agreement. That's a lot of words.
Yes, sir. So this is an agreement with the National Insurance Crime Bureau Insurance Services Office. They have a database, which is the claim search that keeps track of insurance claims involving motor vehicles. And this would allow us access to that database for purposes of investigating auto theft, insurance-related crime and fraud, and homeland security activity. So we can basically figure out where people are, if they've made multiple claims, that sort of thing. If anyone has any questions, I do have Sergeant Dillahay on Zoom with us today as well. So, but this is something that they use in the central office to investigate these types of crimes.
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with what they do with this. So I'll entertain a motion to approve item
for
number
approval.
2. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a second. Any further discussion or any questions for Mr. Rumlin or Sergeant?
Councilmember Shealy has his hand up.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you to CPD for doing this. I think it's a big step. We all pay for insurance fraud in our premiums, and it is a major deal, major part of the insurance that we pay. So I appreciate CPD doing this, and you know, and I certainly support it. So thank you.
All right. Any other further questions, comments? All right. Let's bring it to council, to committee. All those in favor of item number 3, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thanks, Steve. All right. We have Chief Courier, and can we do 4 and 5 together, Chief? The item number 4 is a fire department approval to accept the 2023 State Homeland Security Grant an amount of $67,350,000. And the second is a fire department approval to accept the 2023 State Homeland Security Grant an amount of $15,000. That's items number 5. So let's do item number 4 first, and then move on to item number 5.
Certainly. So good afternoon. Item number 4 is for the Low Country Incident Management Team. It's a grant that is no match, and it will fund the replacement of electronics, upgrades to various equipment and other technology, and replacement of obsolete items for the incident management team.
All right, the chair will entertain a motion to adopt number 4.
Move for approval.
Second.
All right. And all those, any questions for item number 4? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Item number 5, Chief.
Item number 5 is very similar to item number 4. It is State Homeland Security Grant for the Regional Collapse Search and Rescue Team. It supports the state's regional task force concept for search and rescue. So this is a no match grant, and it will replace rescue equipment and collapse equipment, personal protective equipment, and will provide training for our team members.
All right. I'll entertain a motion to adopt number 5.
Second.
There a second?
Second.
Second. Okay. Any discussion or questions for Chief Courier? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor of item number 5?
Aye.
Say aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, there be no further business. That was a joke. Nobody caught my joke. Okay. At least someone's paying attention. Thank you, Dr. Kale. All right. The items 6 and 7 are very similar on our agenda. This is regarding the assessment following the CNA audit, racial bias audit. And I'm going to call on Heather to sort of kick us off, to give us a little preamble why we are here to address items number 6 and items number 7.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Chairman, and council members, guests. My name is Heather Malloy. I am an assistant corporation counsel for the city of Charleston, assigned to the Charleston Police Department, and I'm here to introduce the presentation of the final report of the external research and assessment, what we call the ERA, of the Charleston Police Department's racial bias audit implementation. And I just want to give you a little bit of background on the assessment. So CPD underwent a voluntary racial bias audit by CNA back in 2019. The audit was made possible when Mayor Tecklenburg and the City Council voted unanimously on December 18, 2018, to allow the Charleston Police Department to hire an external company that was CNA to examine CPD's policies and procedures in the following areas. 1, use of force; 2, traffic stops and field contacts; 3, internal, external complaints; 4, recruitment and hiring; and 5, community engagement. These efforts were also embraced by former Chief Luther Reynolds and the Charleston Police Department, as well as our chief today, Chief Cheeto Walker. The results of the CNA audit was a list of 72 recommendations. The final recommendation stated as follows: the City of Charleston and CPD should engage an independent audit firm to track and monitor CPD's progress towards implementing the recommendations in this report. So we're getting to the finish line on the CNA audit. This was the final recommendation. So in March of 2023, the city and CPD contracted with the University of South Carolina, represented by Dr. Jeff Alpert, to perform the external review and assessment. USC in turn partnered with Dr. Kale of Kale Strategic Insights to design the project and perform several assessments within this project. The external review and assessment included 4 phases: a fidelity assessment, a subject matter review and assessment, a citizen and stakeholder engagement and feedback section, and actionable findings and ongoing process evaluation framework. The result of this external review and assessment of the ERA final report is the final report issued today that Mayor and council members you have in front of you. Here to present the reports and its findings are as follows in order. Dr. Robert Kale of Kale Strategic Insights is here to present. Dr. Kyle McLean is here. I believe he's on Zoom. And he is here to present. He worked with USC to do some of the analysis in the report as well. Dr. Jill Itzen, CPD's Procedural Justice Director, will present a part of the report, which is the CPD survey that was issued as part of the contract in this assessment in conjunction with CPAC, which is our Citizens Police Advisory Council. And finally, our Chief CPD, Chief Cheeto Walker, will provide some closing remarks. So I'd like to present Dr. Robert Kale.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. I want to do a couple more introductions before we get started. Another member of our research team is here, Charlton Brownell, well known to the people in the city. And then there was also Thwan Fielding, who we brought on as being the team leader for the community engagement piece. Heather did most of my introduction, so I'm just going to go straight into the presentation. Sorry, I got my back to you. This doesn't work real well here. Maybe I can do this. And Mr. Mayor, I don't need to have my back to you either. It's good to see you today.
Yes, sir.
Let's get right into it. All right, so the scope and background, as Heather discussed starting things off, it was approved by the council in 2018. The actual audit was completed in November of 2019. There were 72 original recommendations. We've narrowed that down to 67, which I'll explain more when we go. There's also the qualitative feedback was gathered from community, including faith-based business leaders in forums and personal interviews. We also did a really interesting forum. Several of our leaders are here who are in it, of allied law enforcement leaders. Everybody knows that this was near and dear to Chief Reynolds' heart. He wanted this assessment done in the worst way. You never want to get a phone call from the chief saying, Bob, I got a bone to pick with you. We don't have this done. So he was very encouraging in terms of trying to get this done. And I feel we're fulfilling our commitment to him today. I'm going to walk through goals and objectives really quickly. We'll talk a little bit about method and then I'll get into findings. Primary goal was to do an independent third-party review of the progress. As Heather said, we wanted to objectively review and independently assess the recommendations across those 5 areas: motor vehicle stops, use of force, complaints, community-oriented policing, and personnel practices. The secondary goal was to develop a method and approach to review and assess the progress and problems of real and perceived racial bias in policing on an ongoing basis. So we try to provide a framework that organizes a way to think about doing evaluations as time goes forward. 4 objectives: the fidelity assessment, the subject matter expert review or the racial disparity analysis, which Dr. McLean will speak to here in a few moments, the city and stakeholder engagement and citizen, I should say, and stakeholder engagement and feedback, and then also the actionable findings and an ongoing process evaluation framework. A little hard to read here, but those are the 3 parts on the left-hand side of the screen: the fidelity assessment of the audit recommendations, community engagement, and the racial disparity analysis. This will produce or has produced a detailed progress report. We're going to assess all those recommendations, and we're also offering new recommendations, actually 24 new ones that have come out of our work, and then this ongoing process evaluation framework. Who are our stakeholders? Bottom line is our stakeholders are the residents of the city of Charleston. We wanted that to be clear throughout. Every time we're faced with a decision about how do we do this, how's this going to play here, we go, what would the residents of the city of Charleston say? So we think the general public is very big. Business leaders as well. We did a business leaders forum that was very well attended, and community and faith-based leaders and organizations are another key stakeholder. Clearly, the city of Charleston and the mayor and city council we're presenting here today, public safety committee and other city departments. And then we worked very closely with law enforcement, the CPD command staff, 3 captains. I have to mention each name: Captain Bruder, who I see here, Captain Fritella, and Captain McFadden were 3 of our key contacts. And we talked quite a bit, quite extensively, and asked for a lot of documents and data from them. We'll be reporting that out momentarily. And then allied agencies, the law enforcement group that we had, we included from the other major cities in South Carolina, and SLED, Charleston County Sheriff's Office, etc. Key findings, getting right down to it. CPD has made a good faith effort to implement the recommendations. This can't be said loudly enough. About 80% of those recommendations were implemented completely in our assessment. We have another 11 that are yellow in the middle, where there's been some work done and more to do. And then 2 that we give the red mark to, saying that there had not been sufficient progress. One of the big findings from the study, and it's something that really jumped out at us, and I think it's really important going forward, is that CPD has improved its data collection and analysis capabilities dramatically since 2019. When I worked with Chief Reynolds and the command staff back on the strategic planning in late 2019, early 2020, I can remember sitting in Chief Reynolds' office with a list of about 15 questions about demographics of the department, how they're doing in terms of diversity and issues in terms of policies, etc. And most of those 15 questions he couldn't answer, and he was irritated by that. He said, "Bob, we got to fix this." And largely, this has been fixed thanks to the folks at CPD. We were able to do more analysis, more detailed analysis than we originally thought was possible. And this is big because as the department, as the agency becomes even further driven by data, evidence-based policymaking, and then assessments based on the data, they'll just improve and improve and improve and become a learning organization. I think they're well on their way. Community-oriented policing has become a central part of operations at CPD. Yes, there is one division, which is community-oriented policing or community engagement, but every officer, every civilian staff person knows the concepts and the philosophy. We saw wide perception in terms of the satisfaction or the perspective on whether a CPD was moving in the right direction, the wrong direction, or somewhere in the middle. Most folks were in the middle, but there is some who are very satisfied, particularly those who go through the police academy Citizens Police Academy. We find are oftentimes become advocates for the CPD. Others on the other end of this of the scale are concerned with perceptions of racial bias. There certainly is dissatisfaction in the community with the amount and the transparency of community engagement, particularly around the performance on the audit objectives or recommendations, and on transparency in regard to specific disparity analysis on motor vehicle stops and use of force. The diversity, demographics, and size of the CPD sworn team are largely unchanged between 2019 and 2023. There's been lots of ups and downs, but the demographics in terms of racial minorities on the force, women are generally the same as they were back in 2019. This next one is kind of complicated to present. There were 41 unfilled sworn officer positions in 2019 and 40 in 2023. But to put it mildly, it's a tough time to recruit police officers in the United States right now. You know, the data is not readily available for other departments, but the feel that we get is that Charleston PD is doing pretty well in comparison. So this stagnation, if you will, in the number of unfilled spots is almost a victory when you compare it to the other departments of similar size. A note here that I'll make too, almost a bigger concern within the personnel portion of this assessment is the issue of the civilian staff. And we've seen a dramatic decrease in civilian staff from a little bit over 100 to just about 89, so 20 positions open there. They're filled to about 80%, the sworn staff about 90%. All right, so here's the first piece on the fidelity assessment. So green means clear and complete documentation or independent evidence that the recommendation has been implemented. Yellow means that there's some documentation and additional or ongoing work is required. Red is insufficient documentation that the recommendation has been effectively implemented. So this is where you're seeing the bottom line, 80% green, 16% or 11 yellow, 2, both community engagement objectives, by the way, in the red area. All right, so this is the full-blown summary. We've got the 5 categories across the top. The green, each one of the numbers in the boxes represents the number of the recommendation from the CMA audit. You can see on motor vehicle stops, mostly green with 3 in the yellow. Use of force, mostly green. The 1 yellow here is really kind of a technical point in regard to a mismatch between the way the data is collected and the way that the policy is written. On complaints, everything's green. The history of the complaints piece is that this was an area that Captain Cortella was working on in 2019 and into 2020, and most of the issues were resolved early in the life of the CMA audit implementation. Community policing, this is where we see all but 5 green. The 4 yellow ones here are largely in regard to work with CPAC. And the issue with CPAC is generally the participation of the community, and the department and the community need to both pull together to see how we can get better community engagement going on. The last one, the 34-1, that's red, is the recommendation regarding CPD engaging the community to talk about the progress and problems of implementing the audit. Personnel practices, again, very good. Here, the last one is the red one, 40.3. This is again a community engagement piece. This is in regard to community engagement specific to development and assessment of training plans for both sworn and civilian officers within the department. All right, I've got all of these broken out in great detail. We don't have time to do that, so I'm going to move to the next section. All right, I'm going to talk just a little bit about community engagement. Let me see how I'm doing here. Yeah, and the community engagement piece, again, this was work that was led by Thwan Fielding. Charlton knows this work very, very well. Also, we worked as a team on this. So we had a kickoff meeting at the CPAC, the Citizens Police CAD Advisory Council, rather, back on April 18th via Zoom. The community leaders kickoff meeting, this was one that was unplanned. I think, Jerry, you remember being at this meeting. We had a lot of the senior, long-serving religious leaders there, and they gave us, lots of advice and lots of feedback in terms of the implementation of the audit. And, from their perspective, they had been advocating for the audit for many years. The biggest laugh that I got throughout the entire process was when I introduced the audit as being voluntary. You guys get it. I have reports that as far back as 2012, 2012, folks were advocating for the audit. It is certainly voluntary in the sense that it has not been forced by a federal government decree. Then we did a special meeting with Cajun folks at Gage Hall. We did 2 community forums, English speaking, one out in West Ashley, another one in downtown at the main library. We did our business leaders forum at the Gilliard Center public meeting room. We also did a Spanish language forum out at St. Andrew's Presbyterian. This was one where we spent an incredible amount of resources to try to draw a Spanish speaking crowd. I think we had, what do we have, Charlton, maybe 17, 18, something like that. Wide variety from 18-year-olds to 70-year-olds, from basically brand new in Charleston for less than 2 weeks to others who've been living here for 30 years or more. So wide variety of folks, wide variety of income and social class represented as well. Then the in-depth leaders with community, I should say the in-depth interviews with community leaders. We did 10 of these, talked with people like Dot Scott and folks from the NAACP, the person who took over, many people who, when I showed this list to Chief Walker, he knew everybody on the list. So these are well-known community advocates and people who sat on Chief Reynolds' kind of informal advisory committee. So we talked with them as well. And then the last piece we did was this forum of allied law enforcement agencies. All right, and then this one I'm not going to go over because this is what Phil's going to talk about in just a moment. This was the community engagement piece by CPD and CPAC in regard to the community survey. All right, briefly, findings on community engagement. One of the things that we have to take into account here, actually 2 things, that while we were in the field with the community engagement piece was when Chief Reynolds had a relapse and his illness and status was in the media pretty much. So this influenced the data that we collected in these forums because there's a lot of concern about who's in charge, how's this going to go forward, and then ultimately, as we all know, and tragically, the chief passed, and that was like a couple of days right before our forum. So this influenced, and all the emotion regarding it influenced what we heard. And one of the things that we heard was that there was a lack of clarity regarding organizational hierarchy at the time. We also heard loudly and clearly, both in our forums out in West Ashley and especially in the forum that we did here downtown, in terms of independence of CPAC. And and I'm not sure we have it figured out, but there is concerns with CPAC not being fully independent from CPD, and that may be part of the reason for the lack of attendance at some of those meetings. Certainly room for improvement in public communications. We did get some feedback that communication with the police has improved. We certainly had a couple of testimonials talking about specifically conversations with DC Thompson that went on, and they were like, gosh, this guy listened to me and he never fired back. He just listened and understood. So we had great feedback on that. and the improved communications of police, particularly with business owners. And then in terms of community policing, again, this is a similar finding that I mentioned earlier. Not only is community policing being implemented throughout the department, but the citizens are feeling it. They're seeing it and they're feeling it. And so they like it when they get to know their local officers have this communication. So we did get that. Perhaps the most consistent concern that we had raised during the community engagement piece are concerns that CPD officers, or frankly, any police officer or any law enforcement officer, is properly trained to interact with individuals with mental health needs, especially those who are experiencing homelessness. And so this is a big concern that we hear from folks. I know that in the department, there's experiments going on and development of kind of a co-response model with mental health providers. CPD is aware of this and is working on it, but a very consistent concern.
I think Councilman Shealy has hands up.
Yes, we're going to continue with the presentation first with all four speakers, and then we'll come back for the committee members to ask questions or offer input.
Thank you. All right, at this point, I'd like to turn the mic over to Dr. Kyle McLean. Kyle, it's yours. I'll flip for you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Kyle McLean. I have a PhD in criminology and criminal justice and have been studying policing issues and policing data for the better part of a decade now. My role on this project was as the subject matter expert, and specifically to look at CPD's data across three categories: motor vehicle stops, uses of force, and complaints. And my goals were twofold. The first was to look at improvements in data quality and structure. Many of the recommendations that CNA provided during the audit back in 2019 were data related, and specifically related to pretty significant weaknesses that CPD had in its data structure and collection strategies. So sort of my first goal is just to look at those and see how much data quality has improved across these three categories. And then as a secondary goal, we also mined those improvements to try to see what racial disparities we could assess and determine the degree to which they existed and where they were concentrated and that sort of thing across these three categories. With that, I should point out right from the start, because the initial audit was called a racial bias audit, CNA makes it very clear in their report, and I will echo their statement as well, that this analysis cannot prove bias. We can't infer any officer's intent through the data that we have. However, I don't think that's a reason to dismiss these analyses. I think racial disparities are still important for us to understand, still important for us to look at and give us an idea of areas of improvement for CPD as they move forward. So with that, I'll start out with the motor vehicle stops. I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record as I go through these three categories, but I want to be very clear that CPD has made pretty incredible progress in improving data quality for all three categories, but for motor vehicle stops, probably most importantly. When CNA conducted the audit in 2019, data on motor vehicle stops was in three separate databases. Those are the field contacts database that CPD holds, their records management system, and then also a statewide system called SCATS that tracks all citations and accident data for the entire state. At the time, that data was siloed and could not be combined in any way. So analyses were pretty limited in their ability to look at various things. So for example, all of the analyses that CNA ran in 2019, they had to look at stops that ended in a warning and stops that ended in a citation separately. They could not look at traffic stops just as a broader category. I am very happy to report that since 2019, CPD has fixed this. Their data is still kept in three different databases, but they are no longer siloed. They have identifying variables that can connect all of that data and allow us to look at traffic stops in greater detail. I want to point out that this is a particularly Herculean effort because one of the holdups was actually the statewide database that CPD has no control over, but they successfully petitioned the state and were able to get a field added to that statewide database that now allows them to merge data across these three data sets. So it's a very impressive feat, and has set CPD on the right track, as Bob was mentioning earlier, to be a learning organization and to continue to improve through continued analyses. Moving to the findings on this subject, I don't want to go into too much detail because I know we're limited on time, but just to sort of hit sort of the high level findings that we had. The first is consistent with the CNA audit. Black drivers are still stopped and warned at higher rates than we would expect, given their proportion of the driving population, which we estimate using accident data also collected by CPD. This again, it's consistent with the CNA audit. The disparity has gotten slightly larger since 2019, but it's not that much larger. So it's largely consistent with their findings. Beyond that, though, our new analytic capabilities allow us to look at where those disparities are occurring. And critically, what we find is that speeding violations and alcohol violations, stops made for speeding violations and alcohol violations have very minimal disparities. They're virtually non-existent. If you look at just traffic stops for speeding or traffic stops for DUI, open containers, things like that. On the other hand, whenever you shift focus to non-moving violations, things like expired licenses, expired registrations, those types of stops, disparities are much larger. And that's what largely drives those disparities for warnings as well. And so our recommendation is that CPD should evaluate the effectiveness of their strategies regarding these non-moving violations, consider their effectiveness at achieving public safety goals, and determine whether or not any changes need to be made to try to minimize those disparities. Beyond that, we also did a new analysis that CNA was unable to do, and I recommend that CPD continue to do moving forward in the future, which is called a hit rates analysis. At its core, a hit rates analysis simply looks at the percentage of searches that are conducted during traffic stops that result in findings of contraband. Could someone go to the next slide for me, please? So when we do this, what we find, if you look at those bars on the right-hand side, when a white driver is searched for probable cause, contraband is found roughly 70% of the time. On the other hand, when a black driver is searched on the basis of probable cause, contraband is only found about 53% of the time. This is a pretty sizable disparity that indicates that African Americans are more likely to be searched at the conclusion of a traffic stop on the basis of probable cause. And I would recommend that CPD continue to evaluate its training and look for areas of improvement by making sure that those indicators they're teaching officers support probable cause are related to findings of contraband and unrelated to race. Next slide, please. Moving into use of force, again, acknowledging that I'm going to sound like a broken record, CPD has again made pretty substantial improvements to their data sets. At the time of the CNA audit, they were unable to track the actual instances of uses of force, meaning there were no identifiers for citizens. So there was impossible within a given use of force incident to track which force was being used against which citizen across the entire incident if it was an incident involving more than one citizen. This has been, again, rectified. CPD has done some pretty sizable improvements to uses of force as well that allow us to do some more detailed analyses. Beyond that, Bob mentioned there was a recommendation that is yellow that deals with the use of force classifications. CPD currently tracks 19 different levels of force in their use of force database. This is very good in some regards, in the sense that they track an extensive number of preparatory actions, things like drawing and pointing a firearm, drawing and pointing a taser, that are really good for accountability and transparency, and a pretty notable finding in that regard. Not a lot of agencies track those types of preparatory actions, so they do a very good job at that. On the other hand, when you look at their empty hands use of force levels, those overlap pretty considerably, and they're pretty inconsistent with the way that they're identified in policy. The policy itself is fine. It's just the clarification on those force levels in their database and to their officers as they fill out the data that goes into that database would be a sizable asset to the department and allow them to do better analyses moving forward. We go to the next slide. Beyond that, CNA initially looked at use of force disparities using propensity score matching. I recommend that CPD not do that in the future for the primary reason that propensity score matching in this sense only detects disparities in the levels of force used and not whether or not an officer decides to use force. For that, I'd recommend that CPD move towards a more traditional benchmarking approach. We did that in the report. You can look at it there for more detail. But to boil it down for you, essentially, we looked at a census benchmark, which you can see here. The benchmark is the dark gray bar, and then the yellow, orange, and green bars are the percentage of use of force incidents involving an individual of a particular race. Next slide, please. So we did census. We also looked at arrests. That's this dark gray benchmark. And then we also looked at field contacts. Last slide, please. None of these are a perfect benchmark. The census is problematic because, as I am sure you are all intimately familiar, the people that CPD interacts with on a daily basis may or may not be residents, right? There are plenty of tourists, people that live outside the city that commute in. They're not reflected in a census benchmark, but are absolutely part of CPD's constituency and the people that they interact with. So the census benchmark can be pretty misleading. Arrests are also a little bit problematic because there are plenty of reasons an officer might use one of these reportable uses of force that doesn't result in an arrest. So for example, we've talked about drawing and pointing a firearm. There are many safety reasons an officer might draw and point a firearm, but not actually end up arresting anyone in that encounter. And so that makes arrests a pretty rough benchmark. The last one, field contacts, is a little bit problematic because field contact cards are only filled out for proactive activities. And there are tons of use of force incidents that happen as a result of calls for service and reactive activities. So they're each pretty problematic, but there is a common theme, which is, as you might have noticed, consistently the bars for minority citizens are higher than the dark gray benchmark across all three of these slides I just showed you, which suggests that there is some level of disparity here. Although we're not confident in the size of that, it might be very small, it might be larger. It's difficult to know given our current benchmarking capabilities. Beyond that, you might have also noticed that the orange bar is always closer to the dark gray bar than the yellow bar. What that means is that the disparities are much larger when we look at drawing and pointing a firearm as compared to using actual physical force. The good news is that CPD has, again, increased abilities to analyze this data. It can now be connected to CAD data. And so this can be investigated further. It was just a little bit beyond the scope of what we were doing here. And I would recommend that CPD investigate that further and try to determine why there is that difference between drawing and pointing a firearm and physical force. One more slide, please. And so then my last area, and I'll keep this brief because I know I've run over on time. Dr. Kale, I apologize. But our last area was complaints. And again, broken record, but data improvements are massive here. At the time of the CNA audit, CPD sort of inconsistently tracked Class B complaints, which are less serious complaints. As a result, CNA's data only reflected an average of about 37 external allegations against CPD officers per year. The current data with improvements in tracking those Class B offenses now looks at about 158 external allegations per year. I know that increases in complaints can seem like a bad thing, but in this case, we think it is a very good thing because it is reflective of CPD accepting and investigating and taking seriously complaints from members of the public. Beyond that, we don't find any sizable or really any at all racial disparities in the dispositions of allegations, either by the person filing the allegation externally or by the race of the officer that the allegation is filed against. So sort of internal disparities. We don't see any evidence of disparities in those two areas. We do see that internal complaints are more likely to be sustained than compared to external complaints. There's probably some pretty good reasons for that in the sense that an officer is going to know what is and is not against policy. And so their complaints are likely to be more accurate than a member of the general public who may be less familiar with CPD policies. So it's a little bit understandable, but I would also encourage CPD to make sure that they continue to take external allegations seriously and investigate them thoroughly. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Kale.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate your work on this and your collaboration and collegiality throughout the last 7 months working together. As we're a little short on time, I'm not going to go through all 24 of these recommendations. They are in the report, but rather I'm going to talk about three key themes rather. And you know, I was just mentioning to some of the folks from CPD earlier that this 2020 to 2025 leadership plan has really stood the test of time pretty well. You look back at that now, a lot of those activities have been implemented, and these foundational values that I worked really hard with the command staff and particularly the leadership of Chief Reynolds. So there's 3 of them, and the recommendations are organized with a note of which one of these themes applies. Be data-driven, evidence-based, be a learning organization. Policing is complex. If there's anything that we learn from this, it's complex and it's hard to understand. There's nobody that's got every aspect of it fully under their control. And so this is an essential piece for the department to continue with. This isn't new. This is something that was defined well over 5 years ago. And we make recommendations specific to this. Second, invest in CPD's people, recruitment, retention, training, development. See Sergeant Gibson here, tremendous work in terms of recruitment that has really been nationally recognized in a lot of ways. So this we think has to continue. The quality of the officer that is recruited, the training that's provided, and the development supervision is essential to having a great police department. And lastly, continue CPD's commitment to the philosophy of community-based policing. We're seeing it work. I think we'll see more if we would come back and do a similar research in 2 or 3 years. But clearly, this philosophy is ingrained in the department, and we suggest it continue. One last thing. I'm going to jump through these slides here quickly, and I got one last one, and then we'll end it up and toss it to Jill. Hopefully, one more. All right, here we are. So an additional objective, the last of the 4 objectives, was how do you do this evaluation going forward? You know, what's the framework like for doing this as time goes on? The first piece that we would recommend is to report on outcomes, not just outputs. Here's the example. How many people were trained? You got that? That's an output. You know that's there. What were they trained in? And you got the topic that's there. But what we really need to know is, were they able to implement this training while they're in the field? So what is the actual outcome of that? Similarly, with the racial disparity analysis, we can do all these things in the framework of the recommendations of CNA. Have we seen change in disparities? If not, what do we need to do differently? So that's one key pillar of evaluation going forward. Outcomes, not just outputs. Secondly, employ multiple methods of community engagement. You know, this is something that I think everybody's still learning, especially in hopefully the post-COVID era now. In addition to the chief's illness, most of this work was done during COVID. And so I never knew Zoom prior to COVID. I think a lot of people were with me. And so there's new methods available, both technological, and you know, some of the best responses we got were old-fashioned community meetings where you got some sandwiches and people sit down and talk to each other. So it's both the technological and the kind of low-tech, high-touch piece. So we consider that the second pillar of evaluation of the evaluation framework going forward. And then the third is this: establish a reliable reporting rhythm. We've got to have the chief or his designates reporting every 3 months, maybe every 6 months on this date in this place. You can get it via Zoom here or via your YouTube channel here. You can get it in person there and have it so that the citizenry and those stakeholders know that this is when they're going to see the data. This is going to be consistent over time, and we build this pattern of reliable reporting month after month, year after year, decade after decade, so people become aware and are on the same page. We know we're going to see this stuff. It's fine. So let's go for it. I want to make one last statement before I turn this over, and I've got a lot of questions about this, so I want to state it right now. I got absolutely tremendous cooperation from CPD. Every captain that I interviewed, every individual who was part of the civilian staff that I knew. They were all open with me. They all responded to our questions. They provided the data. More than 250 documents collected. 250, all up on a drive that we could share. I have respect for the CPD going into this project, coming out of this project. My respect for the men and women of CPD is enhanced. These are good people working hard. Somebody you'd want to have on the scene if one of your loved ones is in a crime victim situation. So I thank you for that, Chief.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Kale, and we're going to appreciate those closing comments. And we're going to go to Dr. Jill next, and then Chief Walker. Note, Chief Walker's, yeah, we're going to bring you up as a cleanup, Chief Walker.
And I'm going to turn this around a little bit, so we'll. All right, I'll just wait until, let me see if I can move forward here. My PowerPoint is here somewhere. Some assistance with that? I have a separate PowerPoint from the survey. Yes. Yeah, the survey. Well, so let me, I'll go ahead and just kind of start as we pull this up. I'm very grateful to see everybody here. Thank you all for having me. Great to see everyone in the audience today to talk about this important work. So in case you don't know me, my name is Jill Itzen. I'm the Procedural Justice and Research Director at the Charleston Police Department, and have had the pleasure with working with a lot of folks on this important effort over the last few months. And so we're happy to be here to talk about that today. My component, I'm really going to address you regarding one of the components of the project that was the CPD, that was really CPD led, with great collaboration from members of our Citizen Police Advisory Council, and a couple of whom I see sitting here today. So your efforts in this regard is helpful as well. Yes, that looks like the one. Thank you. But overall, this project was a component of not only the external review and assessment, part of the community feedback portion, but it was also part of the CPD's 2020 to 2025 strategic leadership plan. And so we really wanted to do a good job with this, to be able to fulfill both of those areas. There we go. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. So, and again, so we partnered with CPAC. CPAC was instrumental in helping us design the survey, and also gave us feedback along the way with multiple drafts, question wording, and question order. We also got assistance from the external and review team, given their expertise in various areas of survey design and implementation, and also the subject matter. We were happy to have feedback and suggestions from the doctors involved in that team. So the main purpose of the survey was to gather data on public perceptions of the CPD's performance and how they have changed since the racial bias audit. But that wasn't the only thing. We also had questions about overall satisfaction with the CPD as an agency and its direction, satisfaction with elements of the CPD's performance, whether it's the CPD treated people equally. We also had questions regarding community outreach events and satisfaction with individual encounters with CPD. And so we had a variety of different methods for distribution, some of which you see over on your left-hand side. This was a voluntary and anonymous online survey, and we did that to try to promote as many responses from as broad an audience as we could. We really tried to engage all facets of the local community. We did go through several drafts with CPAC and the ERA team in terms of what the content would be and how the questions would be worded and ordered. We also distributed the survey via many methods. We posted it on the CPD website and social media accounts. We had media releases. The bottom there, you see one of the local news stories promoting the survey effort. We printed flyers and business cards. We had large signage displayed at special events and at public locations like the library. The officers themselves distributed survey promotional material when they had interaction with citizens. We also had an announcement in the city's weekly newsletter. And then finally, we worked with our contacts through local neighborhood presidents, councils, commissions, community leaders, and others who expressed interest in the external review and assessment to distribute the survey link to the community. We also, at the advisement of CPAC, had the survey translated into Spanish, and we got a lot of assistance from members of the local Spanish community in making sure that we had the translation available in the online interface. And to try to promote inclusion of those who may not have internet access, we did also create and distribute paper copies to anybody that would not be able to engage online with us. So, and we had a soft launch of the survey in mid-July where we tested the functionality and the data storage and repository of the survey. And then we ended up making the survey live at the very end of July and had it open all the way through August. So now I'll talk about what some of the data showed. So one important thing to mention before we continue on with the results is that one of the really key limitations of this work is that we were using a convenience sample. And for those of you that are familiar with this type of effort, often surveys struggle to find participation from all members of the community and all segments of the community. And this effort was no different. We basically got information from those who elected to participate. And even though we made multiple efforts and multiple attempts to try to engage all members of the community, the data that we have cannot be generalized to the entire population. It's representative of some members of the community, but certainly not all of them. And so that's a key limitation that you have to keep in mind when you're considering the findings from this work. And also the sample, we also wanted to hear not only from residents, but also workers and business owners in the city of Charleston and also visitors to the city of Charleston. And because it was voluntary, the respondents had the opportunity to skip any questions they did not choose to answer. So what I've done here is I'm giving you the total number of responses we received for each question, and they differ depending on the question. Another thing to mention is I kept all of the responses in the analysis to promote transparency so the community could see precisely the information that we recorded. And so when you start looking at the information, we did have 1,184 different interactions with the survey. So basically that accounts for 1,184 rows of data. Some of those rows were entirely blank because citizens decided not to answer any questions. Some of those were partially complete and others were fully complete. So just to get an idea of the type of data that we received from this effort. So in terms of people who elected to identify themselves based on their demographics, the survey respondents were 53% female, 38.1% male, and then the remaining were non-binary, other, or preferred not to answer. In terms of age, the mean age of the respondent was 54.6 years. We had a minimum age of 17 for our respondents and a maximum age of 86. So if you were to compare this sample to the Charleston community, and of course we were looking at more people than who reside in Charleston, the sample tends to skew older. And then this is the breakdown of self-reported race and ethnicity of the survey respondents. You can't see it quite at the top, but 8% of the respondents identified as African-American or Black, 1.1% identified as American Indian, Alaska Native, Native American or Indigenous, and 0.08 identified as Asian. The rest of the percentages you can see on the slide. Overall, the overwhelming majority of respondents identified as white or Caucasian. So again, if you were going to compare the survey respondents to the city of Charleston residents, we are skewing more, the respondents were more likely to be white to this survey. And that's a key feature. We have to keep that in mind as a limitation that we are predominantly hearing from members of the white community in this survey. Regarding residential team, we had a map in the survey to help respondents identify where their residence was located and what CPD service area. And so over 60% of the respondents resided in Team 4, which is West Ashley, or Team 5, Daniel Island, Clements Ferry Road, and other incorporated areas. And the rest were from various areas of the city. So before we jump into the overall satisfaction analyses, I want to discuss one of the methods that we use to analyze the data. This slide is not based on real data. This is just an example to show you how this term or this concept is calculated. So what we did was we broke down ratings from 0 to 10 on various elements of the CPD in terms of what's called a net promoter score. And a net promoter score is used in marketing research to assess brand loyalty. And so what you have is people who rate your services on a scale of 0 to 10 as 9 or 10, they tend to be very satisfied with your service and more likely to either buy your product or talk favorably about your organization. People who rate 7 or 8 are considered passives. Those are people who are generally satisfied, but aren't necessarily going to promote your brand. And then finally, we have anybody that rated 0 to 6. Those are generally people that are known as detractors. And those are the people that you really want to try to engage to improve their satisfaction with your service or product. And that, these are people that are likely going to be speaking ill of you. And so this method was suggested to us by the ERA team as a way to further understand and structure our ratings that we found in the survey questions. So the first question that we asked the survey respondents was about their overall satisfaction with the CPD as an agency. And so the specific question was, overall, how satisfied are you with the CPD? With 0 being very unsatisfied and 10 being very satisfied. And so what you can see is that the largest group of respondents were in the passive group, rating a 7 or 8. That was followed by the detractor group, rating, there were 288 responses, so 32% of them rated the CPD between 0 or 6. And then slightly less than a third, so 287 responses, or 31.9%, were promoters of the CPD and rated them as a 9 or a 10. For people that were promoters or detractors, we asked them to give us a reason for why they provided the previous rating. And we have many, many, many more responses that can fit in this table, but I'm just showing you the top 10 reasons that people indicated when they answered that question. What you'll see is that I have the total number of mentions from the survey data, and those were based on coding of keywords and the narrative structure that was written in the text box responses. And in addition to coding them based on what the topic or the keyword that was expressed in each response, I also coded them based on whether the sentiment expressed was positive, negative, or neutral. And so, for example, the top reason given for satisfaction ratings of the CPD as an agency were mentions of its visibility and presence. So a positive mention of CPD's visibility and presence, here's an example. One respondent said, quote, "They seem to maintain a high presence in the area and work with residents rather than look for every opportunity to pull people over," end quote. On the other side, a negative response related to visibility and presence, one respondent noted, "They are not visible in my neighborhood. I know they have other duties, but we need to see them patrolling our streets." And then below that, the second most common response related to traffic enforcement or driving behavior. One of the 2 positive responses we received in that area, quote, "The city does a good job at policing and focuses on violent crime and traffic related issues," end quote. And a negative response on traffic enforcement driving behavior, one respondent said, quote, "I wish there was more of a presence of officers in the area to control the speeding problem." And so you can see some of the other responses that were given to support ratings of satisfaction with CPD. Moving on, we asked another similar question related to people's perception of the CPD's direction. We asked this question: do you think the CPD is moving in the right direction, or is it off track, where 0 equals off track and 10 equals moving in the right direction? This question mirrored a question that was asked in the ERA's community forums. And so we have a little more data on community sentiment regarding this issue. As you can see, we're shifting a little bit more negative here. We have the largest number of respondents were passive, giving a rating of 7 or 8. That was followed by detractors, giving a rating of 0 or 6, 37.6%. And then there were the smallest group was promoters, people who gave the CPD a rating of 9 to 10 on direction. And again, we asked them, what are some reasons for your rating? Again, you see some similarities. The most common reference had to do with the CPD's visibility and presence. For example, one of the positive ratings for visibility and presence, "Putting a visible police presence around bars on King Street made downtown much safer," end quote. And then a negative response, "I think presence in the neighborhoods is key. They just don't seem to be around much or as visual as they once were." Second to that, we had concerns about or mentions of crime control and proactive policing. A positive example, quote, "Violent crime has seen some improvement," end quote. A negative example, quote, The city has noticeably become more prevalent with nonviolent crimes, and there seems to be no action plan to mitigate the risk for law-abiding citizens. And then interestingly, you'll see there were many situations, 47 mentions, where people indicated that they didn't know what the CPD's direction was. Moving on, we asked the respondents to, oh, I'm sorry. What did I do there? There we go. Sorry about that. We asked the respondents to rate certain elements of the CPD's performance. The question asked, please indicate the extent to which you agree or disagree with each of the below sentiments. So this was a Likert scale question with the same coding at the top that was asked for each area. The statements that were given was the CPD is effective in fighting crime, is responsive to community concerns, treats people with respect, is trustworthy, and holds officers accountable for wrong or inappropriate conduct in the community. So what you see on the bottom, the bottom or horizontal axis has the different sub-questions listed, and then the counts of responses and respective percentages are along the left-hand axis on the side. And so what we find here is that asking about whether you agreed that the CPD was respectful, 77.9% of respondents expressed some agreement, whether it was some agreement or strong agreement, and 7.8% of respondents expressed disagreement, whether it was somewhat or strong. With trustworthiness, 75.8% agreed versus 9.6% disagreed. Fighting crime, 63.3% agreed versus 20.7% that disagreed. Accountability, 61.8% agreed versus 15.1% that disagreed. And then responsive to community concerns, 61.1% agreed versus 22.2% disagreeing. And then beyond that, we asked people, this is related to efforts since the racial bias audit of 2019. We asked the respondents, has your opinion about the CPD's responses in these areas changed since the 1st of January of 2020? And that date was selected because the work on the CPD audit began at the end of 2019. So that was the reference point for pre and post decision-making. And so as you can see, in pretty much all of the questions, the majority of respondents said that they believed that the CPD's performance was about the same before and after the audit. We had another series of questions related to the CPD's equal treatment of people. So for this series of questions, we asked, please indicate the extent to which you agree or disagree with each of the below statements. The CPD treats people equally, regardless of their race or ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or immigration status. And as you can see, with respect to race and ethnicity, 64.1% of respondents agreed, 18.4% of respondents disagreed. With regard to gender, 61.5% of respondents agreed versus 9.9% of respondents who disagreed. For sexual orientation, 62.5% agreed versus 9.1% that disagreed. Religion, 65.2% agreed versus 3.7% that disagreed. And immigration status, 54.6% agreed versus 12.6% that disagreed. Again, we asked people to indicate whether their perceptions had changed before and after the audit. And again, we found that predominantly the majority of the responses were about the same pre and post. We asked a question about people's fear of being that they or their family members would be stopped by the CPD in a vehicle for no apparent reason. The question was worded, have you ever been afraid that you or a close relative will be stopped while driving by the CPD for no apparent reason? And what you see here is that 81.9% of respondents indicated no, while 16.7% of respondents said yes. Now, one thing that is important about this question, we did a series of separate analyses where we broke down certain questions by demographic. And so we looked at this question by race and age and gender and found that even though the predominant answer was no, people aren't afraid, more than half of the African-American or Black respondents answered yes, compared to 13% of white respondents. And so even though our sample size for the African-American population is not that large, that's a key indicator that the CPD needs to keep in mind. We only had 4 respondents between the ages of 10 to 19, but 2 of those 4 responded yes to this question, compared to far less than half of any of the other age categories. So even though there are small numbers of responses, they're still indicating areas of improvement that the CPD could consider. And then finally, this is the last question I'll speak about in this forum. We asked respondents whether they had had personal interactions with CPD officers within the last calendar year. And of the people who did indicate that they had, we had a total of 304 people answer this question. We asked them, how satisfied were you with the outcome of your most recent interaction with CPD officers within the last year? And so there's that, it's kind of hard to see that bar with the screen set up the way it is, but 128 of those respondents indicated 10 out of 10. Using the NPS structure, we found that over 50%, 51.3 were promoters, so we're highly supportive or highly satisfied with those interactions. And we found that 20% were passives and 28% were detractors. And again, we asked them to give us a reasoning for their ratings, and overwhelmingly, the respondents said that the courteousness, friendliness, and politeness of the officers was what was leading to their satisfaction. And in one case, there was one negative response in that area. And to give you some examples, one of the positive responses for courteousness, friendliness, and politeness, quote, "The responding officer was kind, compassionate, and helpful. She made me feel better about the situation, and I had a lot of confidence in her," end quote. The only negative we received in one response was, "The officer was extremely rude and condescending to me outside of my children's school." And then second most common response was responsiveness and follow-up. One of the positive responses was, quote, "An officer responded to my home and took a report, then put me in touch with a detective," end quote. In terms of a negative sentiment, quote, "Never followed up about my auto theft case." And just to give you some context, the CPD's Office of Internal Affairs annual report indicated that we had 238,099 citizen encounters. So these are the types of interactions that are happening every day. And so this feedback is particularly valuable for the CPD to really know what their impact is on citizens in day-to-day situations. So with that, I'll conclude. Obviously, there are limitations in the survey data because it is not a general representation of the entire community. However, we still can use the data to help guide future discussions internally and externally about how to be a better agency, about how to improve and how to be more responsive to the community. This could include informing future changes in policing tactics, trainings, policy adjustments, and development. Also, it should help provide input for future strategic planning for the CPD. And then it also creates a point of reference for future feedback efforts. If we ask some of the same questions, we can see whether there's significant change in some of the areas that we asked about. And finally, it does also give the community a method of feedback that they had not up until this point had related to the audit that we can start to examine and try to see if we can have more discussions that are provide more context about some of the reasons for why the responses turned out the way they did. And obviously, one thing that we would like to keep talking about is how to engage members of the community that did not respond to the survey, because we care about all opinions, not just the opinions of a certain group of people. We're going to listen to every opinion that's given to us, and we want as many people to communicate with us as possible. So with that, I thank you for your attention. And just briefly, specifically, I'd like to acknowledge the CPAC for their assistance, the ERA team, City Council, and obviously the people that participated. So Chief Walker?
Yeah. And I promise I'll be brief, but I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank Dr. Kell and his team for all the work they put into this, Dr. Appert and USC, Dr. McLean and Clemson, all the captains and executive staff, deputy chiefs, and Jill, Heather. This was a complex project, something that didn't happen overnight, and I'll be remiss if I didn't thank them. I think I've been saying it since I've been asked every opportunity, where are we going? It's about best practices, and we've always been committed to that. This is what this process helped us kind of get to the point of where we want to go. We're fully committed. We always embrace this audit. Since I've been here, this is one of the first projects that I had as a captain in the professional standards office, and that's not going to change. We're listening to it. Jill summed it up really good. We listen to criticism. We're in the business that we have to, okay, and we embrace it, and that's not going to change. The biggest step moving forward is where we're going as an agency, and we're going to look at everything, all the recommendations that were made. One of the commitments that I know that we will be making is as far as our strategic plan. This is something that we should be doing regular. You know, as an assessment, any company worth their weight in gold look at themselves periodically. Public safety is absolutely no different. Absolutely no different. So we're fully committed to that as part of our strategic plan. I think our next plan ends in 2025. We'll be talking about what that next assessment looked like. But I just want to take this time to really say thank you. Thank you to all the members of CAJM, our CPAC, everyone that's really helped us, you know, put our best foot forward. It's about perfecting our craft, and that's what we're committed to. The leadership, this is not an easy project. It's tough conversations, and it is. But we have to be able to serve every member of our community, and that's what we're going to continue to do and handle problems, be problem solvers. So thank you so much. I want to save some time for questions and any feedback, and I'll be here to answer anything that's asked of me, sir.
Thank you, Chief Walker, and thank you for all the presenters. Chief, would you just recognize your team who's here with us today? So for the record,
So for the record, Executive Staff, Deputy Chief Thompson, who's actually over operations and patrol. A large bulk of this project is under his bureau. Captain Jason Bruder, who is our data guy, traffic, everything. He is our in-house resident subject matter expert for traffic. Anthony Gibson, who is our PIO, he did a lot of the project and research on our hiring retention. He's a lead scholar, and his work is recognized nationally. He's not just here in Charleston. So, and Deputy Chief Jack Weiss, who's over our central investigations and crime data and lab. So that's my team, and not to forget Ms. Heather Malloy and Steve Rumlin, our attorneys. And I think that's it for our house. Oh, and Jill. And Jill.
yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to open up for questions from firstly members of the committee, and I know Councilmember Shealy, you've had your hand out for a long time and might have got a little tired. So Shealy, we'll let you go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And Dr. Kale, thank you for your work on this. I just had a question going back to your public community forums. What kind of attendance you had at each one of those forums?
Dr. Kale, you have to wait to get to the microphone. Since we're streaming this and it's recorded.
Thank you. At the West Ashley Forum, we had 25. At the forum at the library downtown, 47. Yeah, 47 there. I believe we had 17 at the Spanish-speaking forum. At the Law Enforcement Leaders Forum, we had 7 from around the state. And at the business forum, the business luncheon, we had 10 representatives, owners of businesses, mostly up and down King.
Okay, so less than or around 100 people total.
Yeah, around 100, but our goal at that point wasn't to get big numbers. Our goal was to get into deep conversation and to provide a safe place where people could tell us exactly what they thought. The quantitative portion of the work is what you just heard from Dr. Idson, which was a large-scale survey of more than 1,000. The community engagement piece, while we did collect some numbers from that, it really wasn't intended to be representative of the entire population, rather giving folks the opportunity to speak deeply with their neighbors and colleagues in a safe spot.
Okay, because I know I heard you, or I think I heard you say we saw some familiar faces there, which makes me think that maybe it wasn't representative of our community in those.
No, sir. It was representative of people who take active interest in issues of policing and public safety. Some people are very involved with that notion and others are not. We did have strong participation from CAJM and CAJM representatives, primarily because they're excellent at mobilizing their groups to attend these type of discussion events. I will say this, though, when you learn about the attitudes of the CAJM members particularly, this is not just one set of attitudes. There's a full scope of attitudes that are represented in an organization like that. But if you've got an issue that's important to you regarding policing and race issues, you're going to join CAJA. And so it's not a surprise that that's who shows up at our meetings.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Kale. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions, Councilmember Shealy?
That's all for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you want to make a comment or ask
Yeah,
a question?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question first and then maybe a comment. By the way, thank you, Dr. Kale and Dr. McLean, everybody who participated in this report. First, thanks for just getting us here and having the report. Thank you. Well, my question is about and my thought goes to that expression that this is a journey and not a destination. This report is not the end of this journey that we embarked upon some years ago. And Dr. Kale, I think you mentioned when you were showing the CNA recommendations that something like 97% were completed or underway. My recollection over the last few years of various updates that we've gotten on that kind of completion rating was that there were a goodly number of items. I remember it being in the 30s or about half of the original CNA recommendations that are not one and done things. They're like continuing efforts that follow those recommendations. I didn't hear that mentioned in the report today. Did you kind of look at those ongoing recommendations that would continue on along with your additional recommendations that you added?
Yes, sir. And the ratings that were used internally at CPD were like compliance with more work to do or full compliance. I don't have that exactly right, but those were the two. Yeah, those were the two categories. We did look at it, but we used kind of a different way to categorize. And so there's 11, those yellow ones, where there's been significant work done, meaningful work done, but there's still more to go. And so it doesn't match up exactly. Some of the recommendations that we make are similar to the ones that CNA made. We've rephrased a bit after learning more from our colleagues at CPD, but we didn't use exactly the same rubric or the categorization form that CPD did internally. But clearly there's stuff that was in the CNA piece that's going to continue to go. And then there's new recommendations, some that are similar, some that are brand new. The chief told me that he felt at one point that we were changing the number of yards to the goal line in this analysis. And I said, Chief, we're not changing where the goal line is. We're starting a new game. And so that's really where we're at here. There's been a lot completed. Work will continue, but we think it's, especially with the relatively recent appointment of Chief Walker, we think it's a new ballgame.
Thank you, sir. So if I may follow up, Mr. Chairman. So that's in line with what I was thinking, and your overall recommendations toward the end, some are pretty broad, which I totally agree with. Data-driven, evidence-based, learning organization, those are kind of general concepts that I think not just the police department, but I ascribe to as the City of Charleston organization in general. But one that you mentioned that's relevant to my prior question is the reliable reporting rhythm. And I do think it's now possible to have a reliable reporting rhythm, thanks mostly to what Dr. McLean called a Herculean effort that was accomplished in our data gathering of being able to, merge those three platforms. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, when we started this journey, I didn't feel like we had a good way of gathering that data. And I'm so pleased to hear that we have made that kind of a quantum leap. And Captain Bruder, Thank you very much. I know you had a lot to do with that, but it really was a team effort. So that's terrific. But I guess my follow-up question to Chief Walker would be, what do you envision going forward as an outline for that, quote, reliable reporting rhythm?
And that's it. I use the analogy I told Dr. Kell. We're students at CPD and we did our assignment. You know, I feel I did 98, A plus. I still feel that, but we turned it into a professor and he said, you're a strong B, you know, so we still got work to do. So, and that's kind of what we have to do. We have to go back and reassess and see, but everything we do is based on evidence-based policing, best practices, the education piece, just being perfecting your craft, being a better version of yourself today than you were yesterday. So that's what we're going to sit down as a team and look at based on some of the recommendations that Dr. Kell has made and some of the research that we're already doing as an agency. And that's in collaboration with our community stakeholders. So we got to continue to talk. We've got to continue to have candid dialogue, you know, take away egos and listen. So that's what we're committed to at CPD.
Absolutely. So if just one more follow-up comment, because it's more than about the numbers.
Yeah.
The data is important and that allows us to measure and monitor and all like that. But the human element is an important piece. And Jill, when you reported even that one interaction where the citizen felt the officer had been particularly rude with him or her, you know, that's that kind of human touch or component that we got to be mindful from. My experiences from business most of my life, and I remember my dad telling me because he ran retail stores that a single negative interaction with your employee could turn off your customer from ever coming back in your store again. Just that one interaction. And this is a different paradigm. Of course, we're not selling merchandise in a store. We're building trust in the community and building that ability for us to be a safer community by building trust. And every interaction matters. And I know in the business of policing, you get an interaction with somebody that, you know, needs to go to jail. But particularly on those interactions where we're making a traffic stop or those everyday contacts, it seems to me that human element and the touch really builds trust and is all about community policing. And, you know, we had 44 good interactions to only one bad one. So that's great. I mean, but even in trying to encourage every single officer to not have that one negative, I think in the long run is a good goal to have. So
so if I may add, Mr. Mayor, and going back to problem solving, every community is different. Every community got different needs, and it's really on us to have that open dialogue with those communities to see what best practice will resolve their issues. And we've been fully committed to that. And this is a part of that, this platform. So I just want to say that there's not one size that fit all. We still got to do our jobs. That's pretty much my message to my team, but we can do it with empathy, compassion, and get the job done. So I just at least want to put that on the record for you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Mitchell, you still with us? Do you have any questions or comments you wish to share with us?
No, I'm good.
Okay, very good. I think that covers all of the council members who are members of this committee. Are there any other council members who want to ask questions or make a comment?
I'm good.
Okay. So we do have members from the community present, from CPAC and other organizations present. I'm going to give you all an opportunity if you want to make a comment or a question. Dr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to congratulate the department in getting this project done. This report, the general public does not have the kind of understanding of the kind of difficulty, not the cooperation, but the difficulty of getting this done. Right now, because there's a lot of information, my fundamental question is, when will the full report be available to the public? In what format will it be available? And the second question is, how will the Public Safety Committee take up the recommendations, and what's the schedule for taking up the recommendations in terms of moving forward? Obviously, some of the suggestions, particularly the monitoring and reporting, might have budgetary implications. I know the council is moving very closely to adopt its next budget. So I urge us not to take too long. It took us 4 years to get the assessment done. I hope it doesn't take us 4 years to begin to make the decisions to make the additional investments.
Yeah. So Heather, do you want to answer the question about how it's going to be made public and available to the public? Or
I've got a very short answer for you. It is being released momentarily. It's being set up on the Charleston Police Department website. Is that correct? Okay.
Is a full report available to the public now? Okay.
Yeah, could you come up here? Thank you very much. I'm going to have Sergeant Gibson address that. Thank you.
Hey, good evening. So I just sent it out to the media at 4:10. So that's going to be live. They should have it now. It's going to be on the website as soon as I clear from here. It'll also be on social media as well.
So the cities and the police department's website is sometimes kind of difficult to get to. So if we could make certain we work with IT to make it an easily accessible so folks can see it, I think that would be very helpful. My other comment on behalf of the chair of the Paul Tamarino, he asked me to again ask the question, when will there be a conversation, a deeper conversation, after having had a chance to look at these recommendations at this Public Safety Committee?
And as you could tell, we had two very full, fruitful hours of receiving information. So I will reconvene the committee as soon as possible to take that up. Since the year is coming to a close call, I want to get that wrapped up before the end of the year. And it's just probably need to decide whether or not we're going to do a special committee on this or whether or not we can do it within our normal time. So we will take it up before the end of the year and look at the recommendations and pass that on.
If I may respond a little further, Jerry, there's a 275-page report. We don't expect everybody to read it. I know you will.
Yeah.
You'll read it from cover to cover. Most folks won't. The report is set up in such a way that it's got a nice interactive table of contents there. So if you're interested in the community engagement piece, click on it, it takes you right there. The other thing that we've done, and I'm not quite sure how CPD will work with it, but we also created what we call a short form report. This is about 12 pages where you get a summary. You get the summary of the recommendations from CNA that have been completed, and then you get the new ones that we've made. This you can digest in 15, 20 minutes. And we think that will make the information more accessible to the public. And of course, I anticipate meetings and questions and whatnot. It's okay.
Bob, since you're at the mic, you had, I think, 6 or 7 key findings.
Yes, sir.
When you talked about the data and the disparities, it was not a key finding listed there. Is there a reason for that?
It's because I was just talking about the fidelity assessment at that time, and the racial disparities was really covered by Dr. McLean. They're all spelled out clearly in the executive summary. Can't miss a page of racial disparities, page and a half on racial disparities in the executive summary.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else from the public? Suzanne Hardy. And make sure you just identify yourself for the record so we
put it way down there. I do want to echo what Jerry said. I
You need to identify yourself for the record for us, please.
do what?
Identify yourself for the record.
Suzanne Hardy.
Thank you.
I want to echo what Jerry said. I want to thank the researchers, both Jill and Kale and Associates. I want to thank CPD. You've done an incredible amount of work, and we want to acknowledge that. We're also looking forward to digging into what you found out, and we're always on the quest for how do we get better. One thing that we've been asking for and will continue to ask for, and I've heard a lot of good words about that today, is the community engagement. We feel like the key to a safe community is one where we're in dialogue, where we're really, having difficult, sometimes tough conversations with each other. But that's what's going to build the trust that we need to have. And the reason I wanted to say that again is I feel like a little bit like this is the first time we've kind of done that. I feel like sitting in the audience, I feel part of a bit the team. And I think that's the spirit, if we could build on, would be a really great place to go. So thank you for letting this come together today.
Thank you. Anybody else from the community? All right. Well, I want to echo my appreciation, and we did recognize Julia Copeland, who was working on this from the contractual standpoint, and Mr. Giroux on the other side. I've been in constant contact with them, making sure we got to this point, and I appreciate the efforts that y'all had to get to where we are. Obviously, there's a lot of information. We spent 2 hours going through this. I met earlier with part of the team to prepare for this meeting, to have an idea of what to anticipate. And I didn't expect anybody, particularly from the community, to come up and offer a whole lot of critical dialogue about it yet, because there's just too much information on here. But it is something we need to be very cognizant of and be very critical of as to what is finding in the report. I just know that dealing with the leadership team, that they are open to receiving information, receiving the criticism part, receiving the good complimentary parts of this report. That's been my experience working with the police department from different avenues. So we've got a path going forward with this. And to Dr. Harris's comment, we need to make sure that the Public Safety Committee takes up these recommendations and move forward with it. So with that being said, I see our wonderful clerk is giving me the sign that we're getting close to our next Ways and Means Committee. There being no further business